And going to the other issue that you mentioned, so I think we could agree then that the Quran taken as is, like the Quran read by itself without tafsir or something, does not necessarily teach the substitution theory, nor does it necessarily teach that Jesus was not crucified. Maybe we have an agreement on that.
Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'll be reviewing and reacting to a fascinating debate between Dr. David Wood and Dr. Khalil Andani on a central question in Christian-Muslim dialogue: was Jesus crucified? Dr. Khalil Andani begins the discussion by presenting his theological position, one that affirms the crucifixion of Jesus, offering a perspective that may surprise some viewers familiar with traditional Islamic interpretations. Meanwhile, Dr. David Wood responds by appealing to the Qur'anic substitution theory, arguing that Islam presents a fundamentally different account of the event. Before we get started, if you enjoy thoughtful discussions like this, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss future content. Let's dive in.
Islamic views on the crucifixion. So maybe we could kind of start there, and you could explain why you respect those views, because obviously David does not respect the substitutionary or swoon theory views. So maybe we could just dialogue about that a little bit and then move into to other topics.
Sure. So of course, when I say I respect them, it doesn't mean I agree with them, right? But people who arrive at these other views, whether it's substitution or swoon, we have to have respect for their well-intended investigation that leads them to those views, right? People don't arrive at those views because they're bad people, or they're dishonest, or they're not intellectual. What's going on is that people are trying to understand certain verses of the Quran based on the commitments and prior beliefs that they bring to the text, and based on some sort of underlying theology that they have. So, for example, we can ask, well, why did anybody believe in the substitution theory? Like, why was it popular? One reason why it's popular is politics. There was a time where the Sunni Caliphate and the Shi'i Ismaili Caliphate in the 900s and the 1000s were actually competing, and at one point it looked like that the Shi'i Ismaili Caliphate was going to win, but that didn't happen. The Sunni political establishment won. And then what tends to happen is that what the views that become more popular, more repeated over time, because the substitution narrative has just been repeated over time, right? Whether it's the modern period, the post-classical, the classical, it's the same thing being repeated. So one function is politics, but at the same time, people who believe in substitution, there's another idea that they have, which we may disagree with, and it may not be a true idea, but this is where they're coming from. So there's this idea, there's a theology of sort of triumphalism, that God does not allow somebody like Jesus to suffer physically and to be beaten up and disgraced and this sort of thing. So there's a theology of that at the bedrock, and then that leads certain scholars to take the view that, okay, he was not crucified or killed at all. And there's a certain that theology is also influenced, by the political situation at that time. Of course, I don't agree with the substitution theory, for some of the reasons that David cited, but I think we have to be careful about the argument that God, if substitution is true, then God is someone who deceives people. Because, in the Bible, God deceives people, right? I think in one of the books, 2 Thessalonians, verse 10, or around there, it says that near the end times, God will send a delusion on the people of the earth, and the unrighteous people will be deluded. And then also in Revelation, when you have like the different beasts who are doing miracles and false prophets, and they're able to do these things, and this is also a form of deception. So I wouldn't use that argument, it makes God into a deceiver, because if you're coming at it from a Christian perspective, someone can just argue back and say, well, certain biblical ideas imply that God does deceive people. But I think the reasoning that we need to remember is the crucifixion of Jesus and the death of Jesus is not a creedal belief in Islam, right? So if you look up a typical Islamic creedal text, which says, we believe X, we believe Y, believing that Jesus did not get crucified and someone was substituted, or believing that Jesus was crucified, neither of those are essential creedal beliefs. So whatever Muslims believe about Jesus is what I would call an extracurricular matter. And in those matters, people can speculate all they want. It doesn't really affect a Muslim's belief in Tawheed or the prophethood of Muhammad, or anything of that sort. And tafsir is where we find the substitution story, right? And we need to remember that tafsir is not a prescriptive literature. Creeds, Aqidah, is prescriptive literature, but tafsir is not prescriptive. So we have like thousands of tafsir. Many tafsir on a given verse don't even give you one view. Many mufassirun report like 5 views or 4 views or 10 views on what a certain verse could mean, because tafsir is an exploratory activity where the Muslim commentator surveys all the possible meanings of what something could be, and sometimes they pick a meaning and sometimes they don't. So Shabir Ali once told me, and he once told the whole group, that what happened to Jesus from a Muslim perspective, unlike the Christian view, what happened to Jesus from a Muslim view is really a side issue, and it doesn't really have an effect on Muslim salvation history or anything like that. One question I would ask to David, and I'm actually glad that we basically have a strong agreement on this, and to others. So if you agree with what I presented, and if you say that the Quran does not itself deny the crucifixion, are you willing to retract a long-standing apologetic argument that I've heard from David and William Lane Craig and others? And the argument says that the Quran is false because the Quran denies the crucifixion. I've tried to show that the Quran actually does not deny the crucifixion. It certainly doesn't teach substitution. So then are some of the Christian apologists willing to retract that particular argument against the...
So Cameron, should I respond to basically everything Khalil said right there? Look, because you asked you asked the question.
He asked the question.
He asked the question. So can I respond to both questions, basically?
Yeah. Go ahead and do both.
Okay. I'll try not to go too long here. The question was about substitution theory and the implications. And I do want to add that, even though I see a lot of problems with it, and Muslim commentators, you mentioned Al-Razi, who had a serious problem with substitution theory, because it would, if you can't trust your senses, if I'm looking at a person, I can't know that it's him, because for all I know, God could be disguising someone else and making him look like this some other person. That calls everything into question. Legal rulings and so on. I mean, suppose I went out and committed adultery, and then people came to arrest me, and I said, well, it wasn't me. It was Cameron. God disguised Cameron and made him look like me, and so on. This would wreak havoc on just basically living as a human being if we can't trust our own senses. And Al-Razi got that. But with that said, I don't think the vast majority of Muslims who hold to this haven't really thought through it. They're not even thinking about these implications. They're not thinking of God as a deceiver. And in fact, most Muslims who believe it seem to think of this as like evidence of God's superior power and justice. Like they look at it and say, you Christians believe that God allowed an innocent Jesus to die and his enemies got the victory over him. But in Islam, Allah flipped it and they got Judas or someone else. And so you see how God actually protected Jesus. So in their minds, they're not thinking all the way through to the implications of the theory. They're just thinking, wow, God rescued Jesus, and that's a good thing. And God punished a bad person, and that's a good thing. So it's not like there's a lot of malicious intent behind it. But with that said, the implications are there when people want to actually think about the implications of the theory. So, yeah, since we do know that Jesus' disciples went out preaching the crucifixion, I think it is a bit more of a problem than what Khalil was saying with if I have a problem with God being a deceiver. If you look at passages in the Bible, like Second Thessalonians, it's similar to what you have in the Old Testament with where God is Moses is interacting with Pharaoh, and it says Pharaoh hardened his heart, Pharaoh hardened his heart, Pharaoh hardened his heart, Pharaoh hardened his heart, and then all of a sudden it starts saying God hardened Pharaoh's heart, and it's like you just if you really want to go down this route, I'm locking you into it, and that's the impression I get from Second Thessalonians. It talks about Satan deceiving all these people, and then saying God sends them a strong delusion, but it's Satan doing this deceiving that they're going along with. Whereas, and notice to keep in mind, I don't actually have a problem with God tricking someone if there's some sort of good point to it. Like if I was walking down the street and a bunch of guys are going to kill me, and God tricks them into thinking I went one way when I went some other way, I think, okay, I'm fine with that. But when it's specifically in a situation like this where the people who are getting tricked, one, it's everybody. It's not just bad people who are trying to do something awful. It's not bad people who are trying to kill a prophet or something like that. It's everyone. It's even the followers of the prophet, and the implications of that goes even more than what Al-Razi was saying. He's just pointing out, look, if I can't trust my senses, how do I even know I'm talking to you? But if God will trick and deceive even people who follow his prophets. So these are people who, according to the Quran, at the preaching of Jesus, they said, yes, we're Muslims. We follow you. If God will lead even them astray, if God will mislead any of them, it's like, my goodness, now I don't know what to believe, because God will even trick people who are following his prophet. So these are some of the concerns I have with substitution theory. And so my overall perspective would be, if the Quran definitely locked you into that position, then obviously as a Muslim, you would have to believe it. But if there are alternative interpretations, if there's another way to interpret this, I would definitely go with the alternative interpretation rather than the one that leads to all of these problems. And so those are my thoughts on that. And then as for your question, am I willing to sort of renounce the claim that the Quran is false because the Quran denies the crucifixion of Jesus? The only problem here is I'm not entirely convinced that it doesn't support substitution theory. I'm not totally convinced that it does. So I will give you a qualified response. If the Quran is actually denying the crucifixion and promoting substitution theory, I think that the problems that we point out stand. If it's not saying that, then I would say no. I don't believe the Quran has a real problem on this issue, and that the Quran is not wrong because of this issue. We will obviously have other disagreements with the Quran, but I would not have a problem with this. And so it's going to turn into a situation where it's going to be specific to the person we're engaging with. What do you believe about the Quran, what the Quran is saying here? And if you hold that the Quran is denying the crucifixion theory and saying that Judas or someone else was crucified, then I think you've got a problem. And if you aren't, if you're interpreting this in the light of other Quran passages, then I don't think it's a problem for the Quran. So anyway, it goes back to what I mentioned in my opening. It's where this theory comes in. Either this theory is at the level of the Quran, so either the Quran is promoting the substitution myth, or it's later commentators who are actually reading that into the Quran. And if it's at the level of the Quran, it's a problem for the Quran. If it's not, if the Quran isn't promoting that, just later commentators promoted it, then it's just not a problem for the Quran. At best, you could say it's a problem because the Quran might be ambiguous or confusing, using confusing language, but that's not the same as denying a historical fact or calling Allah a deceiver who even leads prophets astray. So it'd be more. You can't say too much about a book allowing multiple interpretations. There are obviously tons of Bible passages that are open to all kinds of interpretations. So that would be my response to that question. Oh, I don't know if this would be kind of a different topic. I don't know if I should stop right now, but yeah, I do have a follow-up question, but I can hold off.
Well, yeah, let's give a chance for Dr. Andani to come back and respond to some of those things.
Yeah, so I mean, there's not much there's not much I disagree with. I think I heard you say that in principle, there's nothing wrong with God deceiving people for some valid reason, right? So I think that, and we do find that in the Bible, as you said. So the issue then is not with substitution, is not God doing a deception per se. I think your issue with substitution was the fact that believers in Jesus were also deceived, right? They also came to a mistaken belief on substitution. So again, I don't believe in substitution, but if I were to put myself in the shoes of someone who does, the response to your concern would probably be something like this, that God is justified in deceiving the enemies of Jesus to save Jesus' life. And the fact, if that is the disciples of Jesus, who, by the way, ran away, they were not even there, right? They were not there for the crucifixion. If Jesus' disciples, due to Jesus' enemies being deceived, were also came to the mistaken conclusion, that is just a collateral confusion, and their reaching a false belief on this matter doesn't really harm them in any way, and that God is justified in allowing a collateral confusion if it serves the primary purpose of saving Jesus' life. Again, this is probably a response that the substitutionist would give, and I'm just trying to sort of be in their shoes like that. Just like, if someone was coming, the old Kantian problem, someone is coming to kill your neighbor, the Nazis are coming to kill your neighbor, so you lie to the Nazis and you say that the neighbor is not here, and then maybe the entire neighborhood thinks the neighbor is also not there, right? So that's like a collateral confusion, but one could argue that the collateral confusion is justified because the primary objective of protecting the person was achieved. So I think a substitutionist would probably argue along those particular lines. But really, I mean, I think like anyone could go back and forth on this, and I don't want to prolong pretending to play the substitutionist. So that's why I say that I'm not a substitutionist. And going to the other issue that you mentioned, so I think we could agree then that the Quran taken as is, like the Quran read by itself without tafsir or something, does not necessarily teach the substitution theory, nor does it necessarily teach that Jesus was not crucified. Maybe we have an agreement on that. So there's no necessary entailment between the words of the Quran and the proposition that Jesus Christ was not crucified on the cross. There's no necessary entailment.
Oh, is that back to me?
Yeah, you guys feel free to just kind of go back and forth at this point.
Okay, jump in. Okay, all right.
Yeah,
that's